because of this system, or you have all this daycare system. 17% of women are part-time. Now, for all of the part-time women, 70, this 9%, chose to become part-time. They deliberately decided, I want to have a work-life balance. I want to give as much time to my family and my work. This is who I am, and that's what they do. Now, about 30% are forced to do so because of circumstances. Now, 83% of women in France who have a child who is less than 3 years old are working or looking for a job, which means they're not exactly in a position of, they're not telling, it's not 83% who choose to stay at home. It's 83% of women in France who have a child less than 3 years old who work or who are looking for a job. If you have 2 kids, it's about 63%, and if you have 3, it's about 38%. Now, on New Year's Eve, I was invited as one of my husband's colleagues, and there was a young American woman, one of the wife of my husband's colleagues. She was pregnant, and she's due to give birth anytime soon, and she works for a famous hospitality brand, the Hilton. So, me being French, you know, even though I'm American since September 2015, I asked her when she was going to stop before the birth. And then she looked at me, and she gave me a look, and I thought, this could have been a good photography. Because the look she gave me, like I was an alien, or like she blank, and then I said, like, what do you mean? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you know, are you not stopping a few weeks before the birth? You know, it's time of getting some rest, because, you know, once the baby's born, it's going to be tricky to get some rest. I mean, I remembered my experience. You know, I'm thinking, like, if I had had my daughter first, I would probably never had a second child, but she was screaming all the time, okay? So you have to take that also into consideration. So her reply came back, and she said, well, if I do, I will not be able to take too much time off after the birth. My employer gives me 1 or 2, I don't exactly remember, but he was obviously, apparently, from what she was saying, he was being really generous compared to her friends, older employees, so he's giving me 1 or 2 months paid off after the baby's born, and that is all. So, for instance, this year, knowing I was going to have a baby, I didn't take any vacation time, so I could add this paid vacation time at the end of the maternity leave that my employer was giving me. So I kind of, which is unusual for me, stayed speechless. and she went on saying that she was really lucky in her case because both her mother and her mother-in-law would come once she went back to work after having done this maternity leave and a paid vacation, etc., and would come and help at least for the first 6 months after that. So it means that the baby would be 9 months, you know, old or something like that, or 10 months old, and that she would now start looking for another daycare solution after that. And she had not yet found that, but she was hopeful. She's becoming optimistic that, you know, from now to 9 months after the baby was born, she'd find a solution. And I thought about myself, and I thought, shoot, you know, I was complaining because my mom was dead by the time I gave birth to my kids, and of course I didn't have any mother to help. And some of my French friends who came here as expatriates, like me at the beginning, they had their mother you know, or mother-in-law who came often to help, and I never had that, and I kind of always resented that. So suddenly I thought to myself, listening to this young American woman who maybe is in early 30s, you know, I thought, finally I was complaining, but I was kind of lucky, especially when I was in France for the first 5 years after Ivan, my son, was born, because I always had daycare or the school, even though my mother was dead, I had another solution, right? So I thought, I know. So I thought, you know, to myself, well, the one thing, the really positive thing about being a woman in the US, definitely is way more than in France, is to be a professional woman. It's easier. You can find a job easier. You are almost, you're not completely, but you're almost at equality with a man. While in France, I think back in the early 2000s, I don't have the recent numbers, but back in the early 2000s, a woman's wages was 27% less than that of a man. So I think in the US, even though we complain, we're almost at parity for that matter. But on the other hand, in terms of work-life balance, maybe it's easier in France for women. But the problem, and it's easier, so we don't, as French women in France, we really don't ask ourselves any questions about work-life balance. You know, we don't have that kind of thing. While in the US, the concept of work-life balance, and you can find tons of articles on the subject, and you put on Google work-life balance, you know, etc., and then you have 10,000 websites to check, and then everybody has an opinion about that. But on the other hand, it's something that is really valid for a woman whose family income make it possible to ponder the pros and the cons of staying or working and getting help at home. Because for many women in the US, the concept of work-life balance is a total chimera. They cannot afford not to work. They have to work because it is expensive, especially if you live in the Washington DC area. I remember talking to this who wrote the book Perfect Madness, Anxiety in the Age of Motherhood. And she spent many years in France, and when she came back, she's a journalist, when she came back in the US, she thought that she had it really easy in France because of all the welfare system, etc., and it was crazy, and so she wrote that book, and then after we had a discussion, she said that the only mistake she's made when she wrote that book was that she had not interviewed anyone who was not an upper middle class woman. That is the only woman she interviewed. So, because us French women, when she came to our book club, and we said, yeah, we know plenty of American women who work and who don't ask themselves whether they should stay at home or worry about which university their kids should get in and everything like that. And she said, well, I have not interviewed those women. I focused only on upper middle class women. So if you really want to know, are an American woman, you know, a regular, let's say, American woman, lives, then you have to recognize that she is oftentimes forced for economical reason to work, so she cannot afford to think about a work-life balance. She really cannot take the time to think that. If she doesn't have a relative, a grandmother who's going to come and help keep the child, it means that at worst she will have to go to a private daycare, because there's no such thing as a public daycare in the US, wondering the quality of it, and oftentimes she will have to pay up to 70% of her income to pay for the child care. So you know, if she stopped working, she will be maybe she wouldn't have to pay the 70% income into child care, you know, payments, but then she would be 30% off in disposable income as well. So this is really, I mean, you start to ask yourself questions when you realize that, and you know, work-life balance, is it really truly balancing your work and life, having to work and knowing that your 70% of your income is going to pay for your child care, or not? You know, that's the kind of thing that you have to ask yourself. And what about the fact that sometimes, and that's my second part where I hope I'm not going to shock anyone, if you are a woman who prefers working and who doesn't like or cannot, you know, doesn't like to stay at home and cannot afford to pay for the childcare anyway, but who would prefer to be working than staying at home, because if she does so, she might become depressed. And when you become depressed as a woman, when you are postpartum, you often sometimes get so depressed, as we all remember the woman who in Texas went and drowned 5 of her kids. She couldn't afford the daycare. I mean, okay, she had a nasty husband as well, but she could not afford the daycare. And so she was stuck at home, and she was one of those women who should have been probably better working, and maybe her kids would still be alive. You know, we have to think of that kind of stuff as well. So when I come myself to the US 21 years ago with my 28 days old daughter screaming, I left my position in France, okay, and so I found myself in the US on an L2 visa, which is called a spouse-dependent visa. I mean, already semantically speaking, you know, a spouse-dependent visa doesn't ring very well in my ears. And at the time, that visa didn't authorize any spouse to work. Now it does, and I'm so happy for those women who come to the US now and who will be authorized to work. I was not, because that was not the case at the time. And I can tell you, that was the worst time of my life. Because I have always been working full-time. I'm one of those ones who, when she was a teenager in France, and there's not that many of us, was already giving English lessons, because I've been speaking English since I was born. You know, I was not babysitting, that's not my style. But I was giving lessons, I was distributing, you know, tracts, I was working in a cafe, just because I'm a workaholic. That's my nature, I reckon, I love working. So stopping working abruptly, you know, being told, well, you can't work, no, visa doesn't allow you can enjoy, you know, I got somebody at the Social Security or visa office, I can't remember which one it was, said, showing me with my daughter Asina screaming, I said, like, you can enjoy being at home with your baby, and I'm like, what? And my husband said, shh, you know, there was no way I was going to enjoy being at home with a baby, with a screaming baby. And my mother, I'm born in 1962, so now you know all about me. So my mother was one of only 2 working mothers in my school, and I went to a private girls' school only, you know, in south of France. And the other mother was an elementary school teacher. My mother was a pediatrician, so she was higher up in the professional way. But so she was always working, and even though all of the other mothers were stay at home, I didn't have that kind of role model. I had a working mother as a model. And she, not only that, but she kept repeating us girls that a girl can do anything, which is a message that you guys are good at giving in the States to everybody. That she also makes sure to enforce the message that girls needed to be financially independent from their husbands. And so when you've had that kind of message, you know, being really told you all years after years after years when growing up, suddenly you find yourself not working and you feel ashamed. So for me, not working, I became shameful because all of a sudden I didn't have my personal income. And my husband, who's a worry worm, was worrying that we would not have enough disposable income because he too didn't know that I would not be able to work. So that was one of the things he discovered when he came here. So that kind of created a rift between us. And so working became my sole obsession, you know. And so when I was finally awarded a green card, you know, I would have be able to drink a bottle of champagne. I was so elated. So I never in my life considered that I should be a stay-at-home mom. There was no question that it was not going to make me proud, like that lady said at the Immigration or Social Security office, because for me, staying at home made me feel, and still would make, if I had to do that again, would make me feel worthless, useless, and meaningless. I was not called to be a stay-at-home mom, and I definitely am not a Martha Stewart. So one of the things one of the aspects in the life of a woman that men do not have to do, or rarely to consider, is whether or not working is something they enjoy, they like, they love, they cannot do without for personal fulfillment purposes. Now, if we put aside the fact that a woman must work because of financial reasons, that's the hypothesis I meant before, and even if her spouse is working, that she still has to work because she still needs the income. Okay, they both, as a family unit, need the income. So I personally think it is entirely normal for a woman to claim that she enjoys being a working woman or a working mom if she's on top of that a mother as well, more than being a stay-at-home one. It is my case. That's how I feel. I mean, you know, I claim, and I will claim it probably until the day I die, because I don't see myself retired even, okay? That's how big a workaholic I am. And so I really didn't like it. I mean, I felt no joy. I felt no sense of fulfillment whatsoever, changing diapers, or preparing bottles, or playing dolls. Why is that? Because A, I never played dolls, even when I was growing up. I was a tomboy. You could find me climbing trees, riding bikes, running around the neighborhood with all the boys, you know, fighting, some of them, running. I was one of 9 daughters with 1 son. We were from different beds. Okay, my dad was a bit of a womanizer. But none of us, we went to the same school. None of us were raised to, you know, wearing frilly outfits, you know, with the lace and the pink and the purple and, you know, stuff like that, to play coy and be cute. No. Well, yeah, certainly they told us, like, sit straight, you know, hold your head tight, put your hands on the table, not under, blah, blah, like we do in French etiquette. But we were not raised to be girly girls. I mean, the concept of girly girl is something I discovered here, okay? I didn't know it existed. I had no idea, okay? So I didn't know what that was. So all of us, the 9 girls that my dad had with all of his women, we're all professional women. We are, some of us even are retired. And professor, chief of staff, doctors, executive director, restaurant owner, lawyer, you name it, etc. The list is very long of all the degrees. All of us, when Tony asked me to talk about the subject, I kind of went into a conference school with all of the others and said, like, hey, what's your input? Because I've left France 20 years ago. and they all agreed. They said that work is what defines us, and that our personal identity is